you want to take some macro videos. There are a couple things you want to keep in mind before doing so and before I show you the different ways and how to do it. First is going to be stabilization. The closer you're getting on your subject, it's just like shooting with a telephoto, it's going to get a lot more shaky. So having a lens with some vibration reduction or some sort of stabilizer built in it and having in-body stabilization in your camera is going to be great for handheld work, but also just getting it on a tripod is going to be your best option to reduce the shakiness. And you want to make sure you have some extra lights with you. Depending on how close of a macro shot you want to get, you're going to see a lot less light hitting your camera sensor. So to avoid getting any unwanted noise, make sure you have some extra lights to be able to bounce on your subject. The first step to getting a macro shot is going to be knowing your minimal focus distance. If you don't know what your minimal focus distance is on most digital cameras, you'll be able to see this little set of numbers somewhere whenever you're adjusting your focus. So I'm gonna go as close as I can, and it's going there around 0.2 meters. So that is my close focus distance. If you still don't know what it is, some lenses will actually have it printed on the lens itself, or if you still don't know, you can obviously just Google it. Right here, I can't really get super close. I can zoom in on this kit lens, but when I pull it as close as possible, that's all I'm getting. And I can kind of zoom out a bit and try to get a little bit closer, but it's pretty hard to nail focus somewhere right there. That's about as close as I can get on this particular kit lens. While most kit lenses don't have the greatest minimum focus distance, picking up a prime lens usually is going to result in a better minimum focus distance, but it all just kind of depends on the brand. This one I have here is a 35 millimeter, and the minimum focus distance on this is going to be a 1/4 meter or 0.8 feet. So this one will allow us to get a little bit closer than the kit lens we had. And this one is also going to be adapted because it is an EF lens on a Fuji film camera. I'm going to explain what all that means here in just a sec. One thing I will suggest doing whenever you are trying to do something with close focusing is to go to your camera's menu settings. This is going to be different for everybody, but just look for something called manual focus peaking or manual focus assist. So right here, I'm going to turn mine on. And now you're going to see when I adjust my focus, anything that comes into focus is going to have this red outline on it. And look at that. Now we got him in focus. And honestly, I can bring the focus in a little bit closer to right there. But one great way to check focus, something that a lot of filmmakers do, is using a tape measure. So this will also come into handy, especially when you're using something like an adapted lens like I have on this, because it is not made for this camera. I'll show you how you use this tape measure. There's a little icon on the side of the camera. It looks like a circle with a line through it. And that icon represents where your focal plane is. So it's actually directly where your sensor is on your camera. A lot of bigger cinema cameras are going to have a hook next to that so that you can hook a tape measure on, but most mirrorless and DSLRs aren't. So we're just going to try to do it as best as we can. All you do is just stick it right there and then pull your tape measure out and figure out about where that's going to land. And at my closest focus distance is right here, and that is right about 11 inches. But because I have this lens adapted, my close focus distance is going to be at 11 inches versus 0.8 feet, equivalent to about 9.5 inches. So with adding that adapter on there, we can see that we actually increased our minimum focus distance. That is something to keep in mind if you're adapting the lenses and trying to get macro shots. If you only have a kit lens, don't worry. There is another piece of gear that you can get that's actually pretty inexpensive, and that is going to be a close focusing diopter. Now this is one that you can get pretty cheap on Amazon. As you can see, it's really just a big chunky piece of metal that attaches onto your filter thread, but this is for a wide angle. However, if you look really closely, you can see where it says macro. So all we'll do is just unscrew this bottom part, just so we have the macro part of it, and we'll screw that on the front of our lens. Now do keep in mind that your lens may need a step up or step down ring depending on what the filter thread is for this to fit. And now that we have this diopter on here, it's like really hard to make out. So let's zoom it a little bit wider and try to adjust our focus. And you'll see that it's way harder to focus because the diopter makes it where it's easier to get things closer in focus. So let's bring this guy in to really pull in. Look at that. Look how much we were able to come in and see a lot more. Using one of these cheaper attachments does kind of come with a downside, and that is all this weird fringing that you do have going on, some chromatic aberration. So it's not going to be the prettiest or cleanest image, but you are able to get a really awesome macro shot with this. The next way of getting a closer shot is something that you probably have heard of, but haven't really thought about using, and that is a macro lens. I'm going to be showing you two types of macro lenses. I'm not suggesting you buy one or the other, just so you can see what it looks like. This first one is my Laowa 15mm f4, and this one is really, really wide, but there isn't a lot of distortion you get with this. So these are just different ways to have a macro shot at different focal lengths to give a different effect. So here we are on the 15mm, and one thing you're going to notice, we can keep it really wide, but we can focus in really close. I'm literally touching the lens. Let me take off this lens hood so you can really see it. Look at that. One thing you'll notice when you're starting to do more of these macro shots is that it's very hard to get things in focus. Specifically, like with this one, I can only really get the eye. But if I want to get more, you can easily just stop down your f-stop. So we're at 4, now we're going to go to like an f11. And you can see pretty much more of this guy, at least more of his face. We can stop down a lot. Oh, it goes all the way down to f32, but this is pretty much pitch black. Now we can counteract this by bringing up our ISO, but obviously that's gonna bring in a lot more noise. Depending on what you're trying to shoot, you can always just take a little light and throw that over your subject and light it up a lot more, so you don't have to worry about pulling in too much noise. But you can always keep it stopped down just a little bit, and you can focus a little bit further out, say like right here, and you can still get pretty much everything in focus right there. This is one of the reasons I love using wider micro lenses, is because you can still get a pretty close shot like we did with that diopter, but we can see way more of the background. The next type of macro lens you can use is a zoom macro lens. So this one's actually a pretty old one. It's actually from Sears, the department store. Yeah, they made lenses. Now, how to do this is different depending on what kind of macro lens you have, but just for demonstration purposes, this one kind of acts like most of them, where your different focal lengths are in one color and where to go to macro is a difference. So we have orange here, and we'll just move it all the way to orange, which is 35. And there's an arrow pointing down, so we can pop that down. Now we have macro. Focus in on here and go to whatever macro focal length we want. So now that we have the lens attached, I'm not in macro mode, just so you can see what it looks like. And I am at as wide as can go, 35mm. And I'm focused as close as possible, and we still can't get the guy in focus. We could try going in tighter, but that's not gonna work. Just does nothing but blur the background out ridiculously. So we'll go on all the way over to our macro area. We'll pull the macro part down, and now we'll twist the lens into our macro mode. And look at that. Now we're looking at him at about 85mm in macro, and we can adjust our focus the way we want. And one of the greatest things with these vintage lenses is the characteristics you get on here, and just look how cool that looks. Of course, with using an older lens like this, you don't have autofocus in here, so it'll be a little bit harder to get things in focus, but I just love the look of this. If you don't want to invest any of your money getting a macro lens, there is another option for you, and that is picking up some extension tubes. So how these work is pretty much like in the name, where it extends your lens. So it'll take it a lot further away from your sensor, but do it in a way that keeps it safe. And these particular ones have contact points, so if you do have a lens with autofocus, they will work. And they do come pretty cheap. I think these ones were around $35 or so, and they come in 3 different sizes. And of course you can stack them like here. So just to show you the differences and what you can get with these types of extension tubes, I'm gonna start off with the 28mm as our control, and then we'll add a 12mm distance, and then a 20mm distance, and then a 36mm distance, and then all of them together. So here it is at 28mm without any extension tubes. And now here we are with the 12mm extension tube, so the smallest one that we have available. And I have to actually bring this guy closer. We can't even get him in focus. Let's see if this will work. Oh my gosh, look at that. I have to pick him up. I don't know, about 3 inches away from the lens. And that's just with the small one. This thing is crazy. All right, now let's move on up. Now we have the 20mm extension tube on here. And look at that. I had to push it in even closer. We're like barely an inch, maybe an inch and a half away from the lens. And now our 36mm extension tube. One thing you've probably noticed is that it is really dark now. And that's just because it's extended so much further away from the sensor. There's not enough light coming in, even though I'm opened up at f2.5. This is pretty much just like using my 15mm macro lens in the sense that I'm having to pretty much touch the lens just to get it in focus. And for the price, this isn't too bad because that lens was about $500. And for around $35, you can get almost the same effect. Granted, if we throw on some light, this is going to help a lot. All right, now we have all 3 extension tubes on. Here's the math right here next to me of how far away we are from the sensor. I'm touching, and you can't make out anything you are seeing. Even if I throw some light on here, I think it's just reflecting back so much that you still can't make out anything. Granted, the wider lens that you have, you'll probably be able to make out more of what you're trying to see. However, just using all of this, I mean, if you want some cool light leaks or bokeh overlays for your videos, you could honestly make your own just doing this method right here. There's another way that you can get some macro shots that's really, really weird. And I personally think it's better used for photography than videos, and that is using a reverse adapter on your camera. So what this is gonna do is just reverse your lens. Now there's 2 types you can get out there. There's one that's pretty cheap, and that one just obviously does what it sounds like. You just screw the filter thread on the front of your lens and adapt it to your camera body. Or the other way that's a little bit more expensive, but still not that bad, is pretty much the same thing, but it still gives your camera the ability to have autofocus. Now, I haven't actually used either of these things, so beware and use them at your own risk. Just to show you kind of what it would look like, I'm making sure that in my camera settings that I have shoot without lens turned on, just so they can actually record. I'm gonna take my lens and put it backwards on the camera, and I'm gonna take our little guy and bring him close. Look at that. That is ridiculous how macro we can get with this thing. Again, that's something I probably wouldn't recommend a lot of people utilize, but if you have really no other options to get a macro shot, that is something you can do to get a macro shot with your camera. If you have a different way of how to get a macro shot than the ones that I showed here, let everybody know in the comment section, and check out this video that the algorithm thinks you would like to watch next. Until next time, I'm Hayden. Auf Wiedersehen.